The gavel's echo died in the suffocating silence of Courtroom 4B, but the weight of those 3 strikes seemed to hang in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Judge Patricia Thornton's weathered face betrayed nothing as she stared down at the defendant, Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen, 34 years old, Bronze Star recipient, Purple Heart veteran, and now a convicted felon sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. Sarah stood ramrod straight in her dress blues, the same uniform she'd worn through 2 tours in Afghanistan, the same fabric that had absorbed her blood and sweat and tears in the Hindu Kush mountains. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation precision, but her hands trembled almost imperceptibly at her sides. Almost. Only one creature in that packed courtroom noticed the subtle shake, the massive German shepherd sitting perfectly still beside the defendant's table, his intelligent amber eyes never leaving her face. The court sentences you to 18 months in federal correctional facility, followed by 2 years supervised probation. Judge Thornton's voice cut through the heavy air. You will report to FCI Dublin within 14 days. This court is now adjourned. The gallery erupted. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashed, and voices rose in a cacophony of questions and accusations. But through it all, one sound was notably absent, the click of paws on polished courthouse marble. Rex hadn't moved. The 70-pound shepherd remained planted beside Sarah's chair like a living statue, his black and tan coat gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. His ears were forward, alert, but his powerful body was coiled with a tension that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than simple obedience training. This was the dog who had saved her life in Helmand province, who had detected IEDs with supernatural precision, who had pulled her bleeding body from a collapsed building after a mortar attack. "Come on, boy," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the chaos. She tugged gently on his collar, but Rex's amber eyes had fixed on something or someone in the crowd behind them. A low rumble began deep in his chest. Sarah's court-appointed attorney, a harried public defender named Marcus Webb, was already packing his briefcase with nervous efficiency. "Sarah, we need to discuss the appeal process. My office will call you tomorrow to Rex heel." Sarah's command was sharper now, tinged with the authority of someone who had led soldiers through hellfire. But for the first time in their 6-year partnership, her dog didn't obey. The rumble grew louder. Behind them, the crowd was thinning. As people filtered out into the corridor, their conversations echoing off the marble walls. Court officers began their routine cleanup, stacking papers and adjusting chairs. The prosecuting attorney, District Attorney Jonathan Morse, was speaking animatedly to a cluster of reporters near the exit, his silver hair gleaming as he gestured toward Sarah with barely concealed satisfaction. "This conviction sends a clear message," Morse was saying, his voice carrying across the emptying courtroom. "No one is above the law, not even our veterans. Staff Sergeant Chen chose to steal from the very foundation she claimed to serve. And justice has been—" Rex's growl cut through his words like a blade. Every head in the room turned toward the massive shepherd. His hackles were raised now, a ridge of dark fur standing erect along his spine. His lips pulled back slightly, revealing gleaming white teeth, but his eyes never wavered from their target somewhere in the dispersing crowd. "What's wrong with your dog?" a court officer asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. "Ma'am, you need to control your animal." Sarah knelt beside Rex, her fingers finding the familiar comfort of his thick fur. She could feel the tension vibrating through his muscular frame, could sense the same hypervigilance that had kept them both alive in the mountains of Afghanistan. Her dog wasn't just agitated, he was alerting. To what, she couldn't tell, but Rex had never been wrong before. "There's nothing wrong with him," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the crowd with new intensity. "He's doing his job." But what job? The war was over. The mission was complete. They were supposed to be heading home to her small apartment in Oakland, where Rex would curl up on his worn military-issue blanket, and she would begin serving her sentence in 14 days. So why was her dog acting like they were still in a combat zone? Why was Rex refusing to leave the courthouse? And why did Sarah suddenly feel like the most dangerous battle of her life was just beginning? 6 years earlier, Forward Operating Base Chapman, Afghanistan. The explosion that changed everything happened. On a Tuesday morning, that had started like any other in the endless rotation of patrol. Sleep and survival that defined life in the Hindu Kush. Sarah Chen had been in country for 8 months, leading a military police unit responsible for convoy security along Highway 1, when she first met the dog who would save her life more times than she could count. Rex arrived at Chapman as part of a specialized K9 unit, fresh from training at Lackland Air Force Base. At 2 years old, he was all muscle and instinct, bred from a line of German shepherds whose bloodline traced back to the war dogs of World War II. His handler, Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez, was a 22-year-old kid from El Paso, whose easy smile had already earned him friends throughout the base. "This is Rex," Tommy had said that first morning, pride evident in his voice as he ran his hands along the dog's powerful flanks. "Best nose in the army. He can smell an IED from 200 meters out." Sarah had been skeptical. She'd grown up with dogs, mutts and rescues that her grandmother kept at their small house in Sacramento. But military working dogs were different. They were weapons, tools, assets to be deployed and maintained. She didn't expect to fall in love. The first time Rex saved her life, it was almost anticlimactic. They were 3 clicks outside Ghazni, escorting a supply convoy through a stretch of road that intelligence had cleared as safe. Rex was riding in the lead Humvee with Tommy when he suddenly went rigid, his nose working the air with frantic intensity. The convoy stopped. Tommy dismounted, followed his dog's alert to a seemingly innocent patch of gravel, and found an IED buried 18 inches underground, directly in the path Sarah's vehicle would have taken 30 seconds later. The second time was more dramatic. A mortar attack on their forward position had collapsed a section of the temporary building where Sarah had been briefing her squad. She came to buried under concrete and rebar, her left leg pinned and bleeding, her radio dead, and the taste of cordite thick in her throat. Through the ringing in her ears she heard barking, frantic, desperate barking that grew closer until she felt a wet nose against her face and powerful paws digging at the rubble above her head. Rex had broken away from Tommy's control, dodged incoming fire, and clawed through debris for 20 minutes until he could pull her free by her tactical vest. By the time the medics reached them, the dog was bleeding from multiple cuts on his paws, but he hadn't left her side. It was Tommy who made the suggestion 6 weeks later, after another IED incident had left him with a traumatic brain injury that ended his deployment. "He bonks with you," Tommy said from his hospital bed in Landstuhl, his speech still slightly slurred from the concussion. "I've been watching him. Rex follows you everywhere when we're not on mission. He sleeps outside your tent. He won't eat if you're not around." He reached out with a shaking hand to scratch behind the shepherd's ears. "Dogs know things we don't, Chen. He's chosen you. The paperwork took 3 months. Military working dogs weren't pets. They were property of the United States government, with serial numbers and service records and strict protocols for reassignment. But Sarah's commanding officer had witnessed Rex's behavior firsthand, had seen how the dog responded to her commands even when Tommy was present, had noted the statistical improvement in their unit's IED detection rate when Sarah and Rex worked together. Unconventional circumstances, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison had written in his recommendation. Staff Sergeant Chen has demonstrated exceptional aptitude for K9 handling, and the animal has shown clear bonding behavior that would be difficult to replicate with another handler. The day the transfer became official, Sarah knelt in the dust, outside their plywood barracks, and looked into Rex's amber eyes, really looked at him, not as an asset or a tool, but as a partner. "It's you and me now, boy," she whispered, and Rex's tail thumped once against the ground in what she chose to interpret as agreement. They completed 2 more deployments together. Rex's detection record was flawless, 47 IEDs found, 0 missed targets, countless lives saved. Sarah earned her Bronze Star after a firefight in Kandahar, where Rex had alerted to 3 separate explosive devices during a complex ambush, allowing her squad to extract wounded civilians while avoiding a coordinated trap. The Purple Heart came 6 months later, when shrapnel from a roadside bomb tore through her shoulder, but she stayed in position long enough to coordinate a medevac, with Rex maintaining security despite his own injuries, fragments of metal embedded in his left flank that the veterinarian said missed his spine by less than an inch. Coming home should have been the end of their war. Sarah transitioned out of active duty and took a job with the Veterans Foundation, a non-profit that helped former service members navigate the labyrinth of benefits and bureaucracy that waited for them on the civilian side. Rex officially retired from military service and became her constant companion, sleeping at the foot of her bed, riding shotgun in her Honda Civic, lying quietly in her office while she helped other veterans fill out disability claims and housing applications. The work was meaningful. Sarah threw herself into it with the same intensity she'd brought to leading convoys through hostile territory. The Veterans Foundation served thousands of former service members throughout Northern California, connecting them with medical care, job training, emergency housing assistance, and the small monthly stipends that often meant the difference between stability and homelessness. It was good work, important work, work that mattered. So when the FBI agents showed up at her apartment 18 months ago with a warrant and questions about missing funds from the Foundation's emergency assistance program, Sarah's first instinct was confusion rather than fear. There had to be some mistake. She'd never stolen anything in her life. The Foundation's books were audited annually. Every dollar was accounted for. But accounting, as she learned during the long months that followed, was more complicated than combat. Numbers could be moved, records could be altered, and trust, the kind of absolute trust she'd learned to place in her fellow soldiers, could be weaponized by people who understood that veterans like Sarah would never suspect betrayal from someone wearing the same uniform. $347,000 had disappeared from the Emergency Assistance Fund over a period of 18 months. The digital trail led directly to Sarah's supervisor access codes. The signatures on the fraudulent disbursement forms matched her handwriting. Her personal bank account showed deposits that corresponded to the dates of the thefts. Rex had been with her through every court appearance, every meeting with lawyers, every sleepless night spent trying to understand how her life had imploded so completely. He'd been the only constant in a world that suddenly made no sense, and now as they sat in the aftermath of her sentencing, he was trying to tell her something important, something dangerous. Present day, Courthouse 4B. Sarah's hands were still buried in Rex's fur when she felt him tense beneath her touch, his attention laser-focused on the crowd behind them. Whatever he sensed, it was getting stronger. Officer Janet Martinez had been working courthouse security for 12 years, long enough to recognize the difference between a dog having a bad day and a dog detecting something that didn't belong. The German Shepherd beside the defendant's table wasn't just agitated. He was alerting with the kind of focused intensity that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Sarah Chen, right? Martinez approached slowly, her hand resting casually on her radio but not yet keying the mic. She'd read the case file, knew about the veteran's service record, understood why a military working dog might be present during sentencing. But she also knew that Rex had been scanning the crowd for the past 10 minutes with the systematic precision of an animal trained to find hidden threats. Yes, ma'am. Sarah rose from her crouch beside Rex, but kept one hand on his collar. The shepherd's muscles were coiled like steel cables beneath his coat, ready to spring into action at her command. Is there a problem? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Martinez glanced around the courtroom, noting the handful of people still lingering near the exits. Most were reporters or courthouse staff, familiar faces she recognized from dozens of similar proceedings. But Rex wasn't looking at the familiar faces. His attention was fixed on a small group near the back of the gallery. 3 people in business suits who seemed to be having an animated conversation with District Attorney Morse. Your dog seems focused on something. Sarah followed Martinez's gaze, studying the group Rex had been watching. She recognized Morse, of course, the silver-haired prosecutor who had spent 6 months painting her as a thief and a traitor, whose closing argument had included the phrase "stolen valor" at least a dozen times. The 2 people with him were strangers, but something about their body language seemed familiar. The way they stood, the way they scanned the room, the subtle bulge of concealed weapons beneath their jackets. Federal agents. Had to be. Rex has excellent instincts, Sarah said carefully. If something's wrong, he'll know before we do. As if summoned by their conversation, one of the suited figures broke away from the group and approached them. Sarah recognized him immediately. Special Agent David Kim from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, the same man who had arrested her 18 months ago. His Asian features were professionally neutral, but Sarah caught something in his eyes. That hadn't been there during their previous encounters. Uncertainty, maybe even concern. Staff Sergeant Chen. Kim nodded respectfully, using her military rank despite her civilian clothes. I wanted to personally ensure your transition to custody goes smoothly. We have a vehicle waiting outside to transport you to the processing center. Processing center? Sarah's attorney, Marcus Webb, looked up from his briefcase with alarm. Agent Kim, my client has 14 days to report. There's no requirement for immediate transport. Standard procedure for federal sentences involving financial crimes, Kim replied. But his eyes never left Rex. The dog's growling had intensified, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the marble floor. We find it reduces the risk of complications. Rex's head swiveled toward Kim with mechanical precision, his amber eyes locking onto the agent's face. For a moment, the two stared at each other in absolute silence. Then Rex did something Sarah had never seen before in 6 years of partnership. He took a single step backward, positioning himself between her and Kim with deliberate intent. Protective positioning. Combat stance. Rex thought Kim was a threat. Agent Kim, Sarah said slowly. May I ask who your companions are? Kim's glance flickered toward the back of the courtroom, where his two colleagues were still deep in conversation with D.A. Morse. Additional personnel from the Bureau. This case has attracted significant attention, as you know. We're simply ensuring all protocols are followed. But Rex's behavior suggested something else entirely. The shepherd's training had been exhaustive. He could differentiate between law enforcement officers, civilians, foreign nationals, and hostile targets with supernatural accuracy. His alerts had saved countless lives by identifying insurgents who had infiltrated friendly positions, weapons smugglers who had posed as merchants, and IED emplacers who had disguised themselves as civilians. Rex didn't give false positives. However, there's something you should know, Agent Kim. Sarah's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had learned to trust her partner's instincts in life-or-death situations. Rex is trained to detect more than explosives. He can identify chemical traces, unusual stress pheromones, and... She paused, watching Kim's face carefully. Recent contact with certain types of weapons or equipment. Kim's professional composure slipped for just a moment, a brief tightening around his eyes that confirmed Sarah's suspicion. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't standard procedure. Ma'am, I need you to control your animal. Kim's tone had shifted, becoming more authoritative. We have a schedule to maintain. Rex's growl deepened. Officer Martinez stepped closer, her radio finally in her hand. Agent Kim, I think we need to slow this down. The dog is clearly alerting to something, and in my experience... Your experience doesn't include federal custody transfers, Kim interrupted. Staff Sergeant Chen, you will come with us now. The dog will be handed over to animal control for temporary boarding until alternative arrangements can be made. Like hell. Sarah's response was immediate and non-negotiable. Rex is a retired, military working dog, not a pet. He stays with me until I report to prison or he goes to the Veterans Care Facility I've already arranged. Those are my rights under federal statute. Rights can be modified under certain circumstances. Kim reached into his jacket, and Rex's entire body went rigid with predatory focus. I have a court order here that supersedes... Rex lunged, not at Kim, though the agent stumbled backward in alarm, but toward the back of the courtroom where Kim's colleagues were standing. The massive shepherd moved with fluid grace despite his size, covering the distance in 3 powerful bounds, before Sarah's sharp whistle brought him to a perfect heel beside a pillar near the gallery, where he immediately sat down and began pawing at something on the floor. What the hell? Martinez keyed her radio, calling for backup, but her eyes were fixed on Rex's behavior. The dog wasn't attacking or being aggressive. He was alerting, pointing, showing them something. Sarah approached, slowly, her heart pounding with the familiar adrenaline of a potential threat situation. Rex had found something near the pillar, something that had been dropped or discarded. As she got closer, she could see what had captured his attention. A small electronic device, no bigger than a matchbox, lying partially hidden behind the marble. "Base Martinez," Sarah called quietly. "You need to see this." The security officer approached with her weapon drawn but lowered, instinctively trusting the dog's training despite the chaos of the moment. When she saw what Rex had found, her face went pale. "Is that a recording device?" Sarah confirmed, her military training allowing her to identify the equipment even without touching it. "Professional grade, probably transmitting to an external receiver." She looked up at Kim, who was standing frozen near the defendant's table, his hand still inside his jacket. "Agent Kim, would you like to explain why someone was monitoring this courtroom?" Kim's two colleagues had stopped their conversation with DA Morse and were now moving quickly toward the exits, too quickly, like people who suddenly had somewhere urgent to be. Rex watched them go with the patient alertness of a predator who knew his prey couldn't escape. 6 months after her arrest, FBI field office, San Francisco, the interrogation room smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant, the same combination that seemed to permeate every government building Sarah had ever entered. She sat across from Agent Kim at a scarred metal table, Rex lying quietly at her feet, despite the "No Animals" sign clearly posted on the door. Her lawyer had argued that separating a veteran from her service dog constituted cruel and unusual punishment, and the FBI had reluctantly agreed to allow Rex's presence during questioning. "Let's go through this one more time, Staff Sergeant Chen." Kim's voice held the patient tone of someone who had conducted hundreds of similar interviews. "You're telling me that over 18 months, $347,000 disappeared from accounts you had direct access to, using your security codes, with your signature on the disbursement forms, and you have no knowledge of how this happened." Sarah stared at the evidence folder spread across the table between them. Bank statements, signature cards, computer access logs, all pointing toward her guilt with mathematical precision. "That's exactly what I'm telling you, Agent Kim. Someone else used my access codes. The system requires biometric confirmation for large withdrawals," Kim replied, sliding a computer printout toward her. "Fingerprint scans, retinal identification. Are you suggesting someone forged your biometrics, too?" Rex shifted at her feet, his ears pricking forward. He had been unusually restless during these sessions, displaying the same hypervigilance that had kept them alive in Afghanistan. Sarah had learned to read his moods like weather patterns, and right now he was sensing something that made him uneasy. "I'm suggesting that systems can be compromised." Sarah's fingers found Rex's fur, drawing comfort from the familiar texture. "In Afghanistan, we learned that the enemy could duplicate radio frequencies, hack encrypted communications, even clone identification cards. If someone wanted to frame me badly enough, who would want to frame you?" Kim leaned forward, his expression genuinely curious. "You're a decorated veteran with no prior criminal record, no gambling debts, no expensive habits. What possible motive would someone have for destroying your life?" It was a question Sarah had asked herself every night for 6 months, lying awake in her apartment while Rex paced restlessly from window to window. Who benefited from her downfall? Who had access to the Veterans Foundation's systems? Who knew enough about her daily routines to plant evidence that pointed directly at her? "Don't know," she admitted, "but Rex does." Kim glanced down at the shepherd with skeptical amusement. "Your dog knows who framed you for embezzlement?" "Rex knows when something's wrong." Sarah's voice carried absolute conviction. "He's been trained to detect deception, to identify threats that aren't immediately obvious. For the past 6 months, every time we visit the Veterans Foundation office, he alerts. Every time certain people come near us, he gets protective. There's something he's trying to tell me, such as..." Before Sarah could answer, Rex rose to his feet with fluid grace, his attention fixed on the two-way mirror that dominated one wall of the interrogation room. His hackles began to rise, that familiar ridge of dark fur that signaled imminent danger. "Someone's watching us," Sarah said quietly. Kim followed her gaze to the mirror, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. "There's always someone, observing during interviews. Standard procedure." But Rex's alert was more intense than usual, his body language screaming that whatever lay beyond the mirror posed a direct threat. He moved to the door, whining softly, the same sound he'd made in Afghanistan when he detected improvised explosive devices hidden in seemingly innocent locations. "Agent Kim." Sarah stood slowly, every muscle in her body tensing with combat-trained awareness. "You need to check that observation room now. Staff Sergeant Chen, I think you're overreacting." The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing the interrogation room in hellish red illumination, but those 3 seconds of absolute darkness were enough. Rex's barking filled the small space, urgent and commanding, while Sarah's training kicked in with automatic precision. "Move to cover, assess threats, protect your partner." When the emergency lights stabilized, Kim was on his radio, calling for backup, while Sarah crouched beside Rex near the overturned table. The shepherd was facing the door now, his body language indicating that whatever threat he'd detected was mobile, moving, getting closer. "Building security has been compromised," Kim reported into his radio, his professional composure cracking slightly. "Interrogation room 7, request immediate." The door exploded inward. Not literally, there was no blast, no flying debris, but it slammed open with such force that it bounced off the wall and nearly closed again. Through the gap, Sarah caught a glimpse of figures in tactical gear, moving with the efficient precision of a coordinated assault team. Rex was moving before Sarah could think, his 70 pounds of muscle and bone launching through the doorway with lethal intent. She heard shouting, the distinctive sound of equipment being dropped, someone cursing in Spanish. Then silence. Sarah reached the doorway to find Rex standing over a figure in black tactical gear, his teeth bared, his entire body radiating controlled aggression. The intruder, if that's what he was, had dropped what appeared to be a military-grade flashbang grenade and was now lying perfectly still, obviously understanding that any movement might provoke the shepherd into action. "Federal agents!" Kim's voice echoed from somewhere in the corridor. "Identify yourselves!" But the tactical team was already retreating, their footsteps echoing off the institutional tiles with military precision. Whoever they were, they'd come, prepared for a specific operation, and had been disrupted by the one variable they hadn't anticipated, a retired military working dog with perfect threat detection instincts. "Rex, heel." Sarah's command was steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The shepherd backed away from his captive but remained alert, ready to re-engage if necessary. The figure on the floor slowly raised his hands, revealing a face Sarah didn't recognize, Hispanic male, maybe 35, with the kind of facial scarring that suggested combat experience and the dead eyes of someone who killed for money rather than country. "Who sent you?" Kim demanded, his service weapon drawn and trained on the intruder. The man smiled without humor. "You think this is over, Agent Kim? You think arresting one soldier solves your problem?" His accent was slight but noticeable, possibly Central American. "There are others, there are always others." "Others what?" Sarah stepped closer, ignoring Kim's gesture for her to stay back. "What are you talking about?" The intruder's eyes fixed on hers with uncomfortable intensity. "You really don't know, do you? They chose well when they picked you for this." He glanced at Rex, who was still maintaining perfect guard position. "But they didn't count on your dog." Present day, Courthouse 4B, the memory hit Sarah like shrapnel. As she stared at the recording device Rex had discovered, that interrogation had been 18 months ago, and she'd never gotten answers to the questions it raised. The FBI had classified the incident, her lawyer had been told it was irrelevant to her case, and the intruder had disappeared into the federal prison system without ever revealing who had sent him or why. But Rex remembered. Rex had been trying to tell her all along that the people prosecuting her weren't the only ones interested in her case. Now, as Agent Kim approached with his hand still inside his jacket and his colleagues retreated toward the exits, Sarah finally understood what her dog had been trying to warn her about. The frame job wasn't over. It was just beginning. "Step away from the device, Staff Sergeant Chen." Agent Kim's voice had shed all pretense of professional courtesy, and Sarah could see the grip of a service weapon protruding from his partially opened jacket. This is a federal crime scene now. Rex's growl deepened to a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the marble courthouse floor. The shepherd had positioned himself between Sarah and Kim with military precision, his amber eyes fixed on the agent's concealed weapon with the unwavering focus of a trained killer. A crime scene. Sarah remained crouched beside the recording device, her mind racing through tactical possibilities with the cold efficiency that had kept her alive through 2 combat deployments. Agent Kim, this device was planted here during my sentencing hearing. Someone was monitoring these proceedings illegally. The question is whether you knew about it. Officer Martinez had backed toward the courtroom doors, her radio crackling with requests for her status. All units, we have a potential federal incident in Courtroom 4B, requesting immediate supervisor response and cancel that request. Kim's command carried the authority of federal jurisdiction, but Martinez hesitated, her eyes moving between the FBI agent and the German shepherd, who was radiating barely contained violence. Sir, I'm not comfortable with... Officer Martinez, I'm ordering you to secure this room and prevent any unauthorized personnel from entering. This is now a federal matter. But Rex's behavior suggested something else entirely. The dog wasn't just alerting to Kim's weapon or the recording device. He was tracking multiple threats, his head swiveling between the FBI agent and the courthouse, exits where Kim's colleagues had disappeared. His training had taught him to identify coordinated attacks, and every instinct in his powerful body was screaming that they were surrounded. Sarah's lawyer, Marcus Webb, had pressed himself against the far wall of the courtroom, clutching his briefcase like a shield. Sarah, maybe we should just cooperate with... Mr. Webb called Detective Ray Morrison at Oakland PD. Sarah's voice cut through his stammering with military precision. Tell him Sarah Chen needs immediate assistance at the federal courthouse. Tell him Rex is alerting to multiple threats. I can't let you make any phone calls. Kim stepped closer, his hand now fully gripping his concealed weapon. You're in federal custody as of your sentencing, and I have authority to... Rex launched himself, not at Kim, though the agent stumbled backward in alarm, but toward the gallery where a figure in maintenance coveralls had just emerged from behind the wooden benches. Sarah caught a glimpse of tactical equipment concealed beneath the work clothes, saw the distinctive outline of body armor, recognized the purposeful movement of someone trying to achieve firing position. The shepherd hit the fake maintenance worker with 70 pounds of controlled fury, driving him backward into the courtroom seats with bone-jarring impact. The man's concealed weapon clattered across the marble floor as Rex pinned him with his forepaws, teeth bared inches from his throat. "Federal agents!" Kim shouted, finally drawing his weapon but unsure where to aim it. "Everyone on the ground!" But Sarah was already moving, her combat training overriding 6 months of legal proceedings and civilian constraints. She rolled behind the defendant's table as a second figure emerged from the court reporter's alcove, weapon drawn, scanning for targets with professional efficiency. "Martinez, get down!" Sarah's warning came just as the newcomer fired, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing off the courthouse walls with devastating volume. The security officer dove for cover behind the judge's bench, her radio scattering across the floor as she scrambled for safety. Rex released his captive and spun toward the new threat with fluid grace, but the gunman had already identified him as the primary obstacle to their operation. The muzzle swung toward the shepherd with lethal intent. "No!" Sarah's scream tore from her throat as she vaulted over the defendant's table, putting herself between Rex and the weapon. The bullet that should have killed her dog caught her in the left shoulder instead, spinning her around and slamming her into the witness stand with brutal force. But the sacrifice gave Rex the opening he needed. The shepherd crossed the courtroom, in 3 bounds, hitting the gunman with the full weight of his charge and driving him to the ground. The weapon discharged again, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the ornate ceiling. "Sarah!" Marcus Webb's voice was high with panic, but Sarah was beyond hearing him. Blood was streaming down her arm, soaking through her dress blues, but her focus remained absolute. Rex had neutralized 2 immediate threats, but Kim was still armed, still dangerous, and there might be others. "Agent Kim," she called out, her voice steady despite the pain radiating through her shoulder. You have 3 seconds to explain why your people just tried to kill a federal witness. Kim's face had gone pale, his weapon trained on the struggling figures near the gallery where Rex maintained control of his captive. These aren't my people, Chen. I don't know who they are. Bullshit. Sarah pressed her back against the witness stand, using the solid wood as cover while she assessed her injuries. The bullet had passed through the meat of her shoulder without hitting bone or major arteries, painful but not immediately life-threatening. The recording device, the coordinated entry, the fact that you just happened to be here with extra personnel for a routine custody transfer, this was planned. Rex had backed away from his captives at Sarah's whistle, taking position near the center of the courtroom, where he could monitor all entrances. Both fake maintenance workers were now on the ground, bleeding from multiple bite wounds, their concealed weapons scattered across the marble floor. Officer Martinez emerged from behind the judge's bench, her service weapon drawn and her radio crackling with incoming backup units. Federal agents, drop your weapons. Courthouse security is en route. But Kim was staring at his supposed colleagues with genuine confusion, his FBI credentials suddenly seeming less important than the growing realization that he'd been manipulated. Chen, I swear to God, I don't know who these people are. My orders came directly from the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division. Routine transfer protocol. Then who gave you those orders? Sarah was fighting to stay conscious as blood loss began to affect her thinking. Who else knew about the timing of my sentencing? Who had access to courthouse security schedules? The answer came from an unexpected source. Rex had moved to one of the fallen gunmen and was pawing at his tactical vest, whining softly in the way that indicated he'd found something significant. Sarah followed his alert and saw what had captured his attention. A small communication device clipped to the man's collar, still active, still transmitting. She crawled toward it despite Kim's shouts for her to stay down, her military training overriding civilian concerns about evidence contamination. As she got closer, she could hear a voice on the other end of the transmission. Calm, professional, and disturbingly familiar. Abort immediately. The dog compromised the operation. Repeat, abort and withdraw to secondary positions. Sarah recognized the voice with sick certainty. It belonged to someone she'd trusted, someone who had access to her case files, someone who understood exactly how Rex's training worked and had planned this operation around neutralizing him. District Attorney Jonathan Morse's voice continued, crackling through the small speaker, issuing orders with the authority of someone who had orchestrated every detail of her downfall. Phase 2 is now active. If we can't silence her in custody, we'll have to accelerate the timeline, eliminate all witnesses, and initiate the cover-up protocol. Rex's amber eyes met Sarah's across the blood-stained courthouse floor, and she saw her own understanding reflected in his intelligent gaze. The frame job, the trial, the sentencing, it had all been elaborate theater designed to discredit her before she could uncover the truth about what was really happening at the Veterans Foundation. But they'd made one critical error in their planning. They'd forgotten that military working dogs never abandon their handlers, and Rex wasn't finished fighting. The courthouse erupted in chaos as backup units stormed through the main entrances, but Sarah Chen and her loyal German shepherd had already discovered that their legal battle was actually a war, one that had been declared long before she ever set foot in a courtroom, and one that wouldn't end until the truth was finally unleashed. 20 minutes after the courthouse shooting, Emergency Medical Bay, the EMT finished bandaging Sarah's shoulder with efficient professionalism, but her eyes kept drifting to the massive German shepherd lying quietly beside the gurney. Rex hadn't left Sarah's side since the shooting, and courthouse security had given up trying to enforce the no animals policy after witnessing what happened to the last people who threatened his handler. You're lucky, the medic said, securing. The final wrap. Through and through missed the major vessels. You'll be sore for weeks, but no permanent damage. Sarah tested the range of motion in her arm, wincing at the sharp pain but satisfied that she could still function. I've had worse. In Afghanistan. In this courthouse about 6 months ago. Sarah's voice was grim as she remembered the interrogation. Room incident that the FBI had classified and buried. Agent Kim, we need to talk. Kim sat slumped in a plastic chair across the small medical bay, his federal credentials spread across a folding table, while internal affairs investigators photographed. each document. His face had aged a decade in the past hour. The professional composure he'd maintained throughout Sarah's prosecution completely shattered. "I don't understand any of this," he said quietly. "My orders came through official channels. The custody transfer was approved by my supervisor. The additional personnel were supposed to be from the Bureau's Tactical Support Division." Rex lifted his head, studying Kim with the analytical intensity that had made him such an effective detection dog. After several seconds, his tail thumped. Once against the linoleum floor, the closest thing to approval he'd shown any federal agent in 18 months. "He doesn't think you're lying," Sarah interpreted. "Rex can detect stress chemicals, fear pheromones, the physiological markers of deception. If you were part of the conspiracy, he'd know." "Conspiracy?" Kim looked up from his scattered credentials. "Chen, what the hell is really going on here?" Before Sarah could answer, Detective Ray Morrison pushed through the medical bay doors, his Oakland PD badge displayed prominently to avoid any jurisdictional conflicts. Ray was 55 years old, built like a retired linebacker, with the kind of street-smart instincts that came from 30 years of police work. More importantly, he was one of the few cops Sarah had met who understood that military working dogs were partners, not equipment. "Jesus Christ, Sarah." Ray's eyes took in her bandaged shoulder, the bloodstains on her uniform, and Rex's protective positioning beside the gurney. "When you called for backup, I thought you meant a domestic dispute or something. Half the federal agencies in Northern California are outside trying to figure out what happened. What happened is that someone tried to kill me to keep me from talking," Sarah said bluntly. "And they used the federal court system to set it up." Ray pulled out a worn notebook, his expression shifting into investigative mode. "Start from the beginning, all of it." Sarah glanced at Agent Kim, weighing how much she could trust him with the full truth. Rex's acceptance was a good sign, but her life had been destroyed by trusting the wrong people in federal law enforcement. "The embezzlement charges were a frame job," she began. "Someone with high-level access to the Veterans Foundation's systems used my credentials to steal $347,000, then planted evidence to make it look like I was responsible. The prosecution was designed to discredit me before I could figure out who was really behind the thefts." "That's a serious accusation," Kim said. "Do you have any proof?" Rex rose from his lying position and padded to the medical bay's small window, his ears pricked forward in alert mode. Sarah recognized the behavior immediately. He was tracking something outside, probably additional threats moving into position around the courthouse. "The proof is in what just happened," Sarah replied, keeping one eye on her dog's body language. "Someone knew exactly when and where I'd be vulnerable. They had access to court schedules, security protocols, and detailed intelligence about Rex's capabilities. This wasn't a random attack. It was a military-style operation designed to eliminate a specific target." Ray scribbled notes in his distinctive shorthand. "The recording device your dog found, any idea what it was monitoring?" "Everything." Sarah's voice carried absolute certainty. "My conversations with my lawyer, my reaction to the sentencing, probably my discussions with you right now if they managed to plant more devices. But why?" Kim leaned forward, his confusion genuine. "If someone framed you for embezzlement, why not just let the legal system handle it? Why risk a shooting in federal court?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Rex had moved away from the window and was now pawing at Kim's scattered credentials, whining softly in the way that indicated he detected something significant. Sarah approached carefully, studying the documents spread across the table. FBI identification, federal court orders, custody transfer paperwork, all bearing the official seals and signatures that had given Kim authority over her case. But Rex wasn't alerting to the official documents. He was focused on a single business card that had fallen from Kim's wallet, its edges worn from frequent handling. "Agent Kim." Sarah picked up the card, her blood chilling as she read the name printed in elegant script. "Why do you have Jonathan Morse's personal contact information?" Kim's face went pale. "He's the prosecutor on your case. We've been coordinating." "This isn't his official DA card." Sarah turned the card over, revealing handwritten notes in Kim's distinctive script. Phone numbers, meeting times, and at the bottom a notation that made her stomach drop. VF audit, Chen compromise successful. VF, Ray said grimly. Veterans Foundation? Sarah nodded, the pieces finally falling into place with horrible clarity. Agent Kim, how long have you been in contact with DA Morse outside of official channels? Kim stared at the business card, as if seeing it for the first time. He approached me about 6 months into your case. Said there were national security implications that weren't appropriate for formal documentation. Suggested we coordinate more closely to ensure a successful prosecution. And you believed him. He's the district attorney. Kim's voice cracked with the realization of how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. He had access to classified information about veterans' benefits fraud, said there was a larger investigation that required discretion. I thought I was serving my country. Rex had moved back to the window, his alertness escalating to the kind of hypervigilance that preceded immediate action. Sarah recognized the signs, multiple threats converging on their position, probably with orders to finish what the courthouse attack had started. Ray, we need to move. Now. Detective Morrison followed her gaze to Rex's rigid posture. How many? Rex is tracking at least 3 separate movement patterns. Sarah interpreted her dog's body language with combat-trained precision. Professional deployment, probably armed, definitely coordinated. Federal building is supposed to be secure, Kim protested. Someone with federal authority just tried to assassinate a witness in open court, Ray pointed out, holstering his notebook and drawing his service weapon. I'd say your security has been compromised. Through the medical bay's small window, Sarah could see black SUVs taking positions in the courthouse parking lot. Too many vehicles, too much coordination, all arriving simultaneously despite the ongoing federal investigation. Whatever agency these people represented, they had resources and authority that extended far beyond local law enforcement. There's something else, Sarah said, her mind racing through the implications of Kim's revelation. Oh! If Morse has been coordinating with federal agents outside official channels, and if he knew enough about Rex's capabilities to plan around them, then he's not working alone. Someone with serious government connections is behind this. Someone who benefits from veterans' benefits fraud, Ray added grimly. Rex turned from the window, his amber eyes locking onto Sarah's with unmistakable urgency. Time was running out. Whatever forces were converging on the courthouse, they weren't coming to arrest anyone. They were coming to eliminate witnesses and cover up evidence. Agent Kim, Sarah's voice carried the authority of someone who had led soldiers through impossible situations. You have a choice to make. You can keep following orders from people who've been lying to you for 18 months, or you can help us find out who's really behind this. Kim looked at his scattered credentials, at the damning business card in Sarah's hand, at the German shepherd who had detected the deception that had escaped trained federal agents. What do you need me to do? Courthouse basement. 30 minutes. After the shooting, the maintenance tunnels beneath the federal courthouse were a maze of concrete corridors and industrial piping that most people never knew existed. Sarah led the way through the dimly lit passages, her wounded shoulder throbbing with each step, while Rex ranged ahead with the tactical precision of a scout dog clearing hostile territory. These tunnels connect to the parking structure, she explained quietly, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. If we can reach the civilian vehicles, we might be able to get clear before... Rex froze, his body going rigid with alert intensity. Sarah immediately dropped to one knee, signaling for Ray and Kim to take cover behind a junction of massive water pipes. Her dog's training had taught him to differentiate between dozens of threat types, and his current posture indicated armed hostiles within 50 meters. How many? Ray whispered, his service weapon ready. Sarah studied Rex's micro-expressions, with the fluency of someone who had trusted her life to his instincts hundreds of times. At least 4, probably more. Professional positioning, coordinated movement patterns. She paused as Rex's head tilted slightly. They're not just hunting us, they're herding us toward something. Agent Kim's face was pale in the emergency lighting. Chen, if what you're saying is true about DA Morse, then these people have access to federal resources. We're not just running from criminals, we're running from our own government. Part of it, Sarah corrected. The question is, which part? And how high up it goes. Rex began moving again, but his pace was different now. Slower, more deliberate. Like a predator stalking prey rather than prey avoiding predators. Sarah recognized the shift immediately. Her dog had detected something that changed the tactical situation. Something that gave them an advantage. They reached a maintenance access point that opened into the courthouse's main electrical room. Rex paused at the heavy steel door, his nose working the air with focused intensity, then looked back at Sarah with unmistakable communication. "This is where we make our stand." "He's found something," Sarah said quietly. Ray tested the door handle, unlocked. "Could be a trap. Everything's a trap at this point." Sarah checked her watch. "But Rex doesn't give false positives. If he thinks we need to go through this door, then that's what we do." The electrical room was a cathedral of industrial machinery, transformers, switching panels and miles of cable that fed power to the entire federal building complex. But Rex wasn't interested in the electrical equipment. He padded directly to a section of wall that looked identical to every other section, then sat down and began pouring at what appeared to be solid concrete. "There's something behind that wall," Sarah said, moving closer to examine the surface. "Rex, show me." The shepherd rose and pressed his nose against a specific point on the wall, whining softly. Sarah ran her hands along the concrete until she found what he had detected, a hairline crack that formed the outline of a hidden panel. "Access hatch," Kim realized. "Probably leads to a secure communications room or document storage." Ray found the concealed latch and pulled. The panel swung open to reveal a small chamber filled with filing cabinets, computer equipment, and walls covered with photographs, documents, and organizational charts. "Jesus Christ," Ray breathed. "That why?" Chamber was a command center, but not for any official government operation. The organizational charts showed connections between the Veterans Foundation, several federal agencies, and a network of defense contractors that Sarah didn't recognize. The photographs included surveillance images of dozens of veterans, all marked with status codes. Compromised, eliminated, under investigation. Sarah's own photograph was prominently displayed, with a red X marked across her face and a notation in Morse's handwriting. "Final phase, permanent solution required." "It's not just embezzlement," Sarah said, her voice hollow with realization. "They're targeting veterans systematically." Kim was studying a computer terminal that showed real-time financial data. The Veterans Foundation was just one target. "Look at this. They've compromised benefit systems across multiple states, hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from people who served their country." But Rex had found something else, something that made his hackles rise with predatory intensity. He was standing before a wall of photographs showing veterans who had been eliminated, men and women whose deaths had been classified as suicides, accidents, or medical complications. Sarah recognized several faces. Tony Rodriguez, a Marine sergeant who had questioned discrepancies in his disability payments before dying in a suspicious car accident. Lisa Chen, an Air Force veteran who had been investigating missing benefits when she supposedly overdosed on prescription medication. David Kim, no relation to the FBI agent, a Navy corpsman who had organized other veterans to demand audits of their benefit accounts before suffering a fatal heart attack at age 32. "They're killing us," Sarah said quietly. "Anyone who gets too close to the truth, anyone who asks too many questions, they eliminate them and make it look natural. But why?" Ray was photographing everything with his phone, building evidence for what might be the largest federal conspiracy in decades. "What's the end game?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Agent Kim had accessed a secured computer terminal, using credentials he'd found in the hidden chamber, and the screen now displayed a document that made Sarah's blood freeze. "Operation Forgotten Soldier," Kim read aloud. "A systematic program to redirect veteran benefits funding toward classified defense projects. Current recovery, $847 million annually. Projected 5-year total, $4.2 billion. They're stealing our benefits to fund Black Ops programs," Sarah realized, "and killing anyone who might expose them." Rex suddenly spun toward the chamber entrance, his body language screaming immediate danger. Sarah heard it a split second later. Footsteps in the electrical room beyond, multiple sets moving with tactical precision. "We're trapped," Ray whispered. But Sarah was studying the hidden chamber with the analytical mind of someone who had survived countless ambushes. The space was small, defensible, with only one entrance. More importantly, it contained evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy if they could stay alive long enough to get it to the right people. "No," she said quietly. "We're exactly where we need to be." The footsteps in the electrical room stopped just outside the hidden panel. Sarah could hear whispered communications, tactical coordination, the distinctive sound of weapons being readied for assault. Then a voice she recognized called out through the steel door, cultured, authoritative, touched with the kind of arrogance that came from wielding power without accountability. "Staff Sergeant Chen, this is District Attorney Jonathan Morse. I know you're in there, and I know what you've found. But you need to understand, what we're doing serves a higher purpose. The money we've redirected has funded operations that protect American lives, operations that would never receive congressional approval." "By stealing from veterans," Sarah called back, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "By utilizing resources, more efficiently than the bureaucracy ever could," Morse replied. "Do you have any idea how much good we've accomplished with those funds? How many terrorist plots we've disrupted? How many American soldiers we've saved?" Rex was vibrating with controlled aggression. Every instinct in his powerful body focused on the threats beyond the chamber entrance. But he was also watching Sarah, waiting for her command, ready to follow her lead regardless of the odds. "The only thing you've accomplished," Sarah said clearly, "is proving that some people will betray anyone for money and power, even the veterans who bled for this country. Idealism is a luxury we can't afford in the real world, Staff Sergeant. Stand down, surrender the evidence you've gathered, and you'll be relocated with a new identity. Refuse and you'll become another casualty of the war on terror." Sarah looked at Rex, at Ray, at Agent Kim, three beings who had chosen to stand with her despite impossible odds. She thought about Tony Rodriguez, Lisa Chen, David Kim, and all the other veterans who had died for asking inconvenient questions. "I have a better idea," she called out. "Rex, show them what we learned in Afghanistan." The shepherd's eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence as he padded toward the chamber entrance, his powerful body coiled for action. The final battle was about to begin. Federal Courthouse steps. 2 hours after the confrontation, the media circus that erupted outside the courthouse was unlike anything San Francisco had seen since the Pentagon Papers. News vans lined the street 3 deep, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers seeking signal. Reporters shouted questions at anyone in uniform, while federal agents tried to maintain perimeter security around a building that had become the epicenter of a national scandal. Sarah Chen sat on the courthouse steps, Rex lying protectively beside her, as FBI Director Patricia Hawkins personally apologized for what she called a catastrophic failure of federal oversight. The director's words were being broadcast live on every major network, her face grim as she detailed the preliminary findings of what would become the largest investigation into government corruption in a generation. The systematic theft of veteran benefits, the assassination of American citizens, and the abuse of federal law enforcement resources represents a betrayal of everything our institutions are meant to protect, Hawkins said, her voice carrying across the packed plaza. "I want to be clear. This conspiracy was the work of a small group of individuals who perverted their positions of trust for personal gain. They do not represent the thousands of dedicated federal employees who serve this country with honor. In E." The crowd below, Sarah could see faces that told the real story of Operation Forgotten Soldier. Veterans in wheelchairs, holding signs with the names of friends who had died suspiciously after questioning their benefits. Families of service members who had been branded as suicides or accident victims, now demanding investigations into deaths. That made new sense in light of the conspiracy. Active duty soldiers who understood that the theft of veteran benefits was an attack on everyone who had ever worn the uniform. Agent Kim approached slowly, his face bearing the haunted expression of someone whose worldview had been shattered and rebuilt in the span of a few hours. "Sarah, Internal Affairs wants a complete debrief. Every conversation you had with federal personnel, every document you remember seeing, every instinct Rex displayed that we should have paid attention to. Rex lifted his head, studying Kim with the careful assessment he reserved for people who had proven themselves in combat. After a moment, his tail thumped once against the concrete, acceptance grudging but genuine. "He's decided you're worth saving," Sarah interpreted. "That's more trust than most federal agents have earned lately." "I don't blame him," Kim replied quietly. "Or you?" He glanced back toward the courthouse where DA Jonathan Morse was being led away in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled and his political career destroyed. How did I miss it? All the signs were there. The unofficial meetings, the classified information, the coordinated timing of operations. "Because you trusted the system," Sarah said. "Because you believed that people in positions of authority were working for the same goals you were. That's not naivety. That's what makes democracy possible." Detective Ray Morrison emerged from the courthouse media scrum, his notebook filled with statements from federal investigators who were finally asking the right questions. "Sarah, you need to see this." He handed her a printed email, its FBI letterhead marking it as official correspondence. "They've identified 17 other veterans who were targeted by the conspiracy, 17 people who died under suspicious circumstances after questioning their benefits. Sarah studied the list, recognizing several names from her work at the Veterans Foundation, people she had tried to help, people who had come to her with questions about missing payments or irregular account activity, people who had died before. She could find answers for them. "It should have been 18, she said quietly. "What stopped them from killing you?" Ray asked. Sarah's hand found Rex's fur, drawing comfort from the familiar texture. Him. Rex detected the threats, exposed the surveillance, forced them to act in the open instead of making it look like an accident. Military working dogs are trained to identify dangers that humans miss, including the most dangerous threat of all, which is betrayal from people you trust. In the crowd below, Sarah spotted a familiar face, Dr. Margaret Rodriguez, the veterinarian who had treated Rex's injuries after their last deployment. She was holding a sign that read, "Our dogs know truth when we don't," and her eyes were bright with tears as she watched the German shepherd who had helped expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. The revelation of Operation Forgotten Soldier had triggered a cascade of investigations that would continue for years. Congressional hearings were being scheduled to examine how veteran benefits could be diverted so systematically. The Veterans Administration was conducting emergency audits of every benefit program. Defense contractors were being investigated for receiving stolen funds. Federal judges were reviewing every case that had involved the compromised prosecutors and agents, but for Sarah, the most important vindication was simpler and more personal. Her conviction had been vacated within hours of the courthouse confrontation. The charges against her had been dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never be filed again. Her military record had been restored to its previous state, with a commendation added for extraordinary service in exposing corruption and protecting fellow veterans. "What happens now?" Agent Kim asked. Sarah looked down at Rex, who was watching, the crowd with the alert contentment of a soldier whose mission had been completed successfully. "Now we go home. Rex has earned his retirement, and I have a lot of veterans to help, people who've been afraid to ask questions about their benefits because they didn't know who they could trust. The Veterans Foundation will need new leadership," Ray pointed out. "Someone who can rebuild trust, make sure the systems are secure, ensure this never happens again." "I know," Sarah replied. "But first, I need to visit some graves." 17. People died because they asked the right questions at the wrong time. They deserved to know that their deaths weren't meaningless, that the truth they were seeking finally came to light. Rex rose to his feet, stretching with the casual grace of an apex predator, then padded to the edge of the courthouse steps. He looked back at Sarah with unmistakable communication. Time to go home. As they walked through the crowd of reporters and supporters, Sarah heard someone shout a question that stopped her in her tracks. "Staff Sergeant Chen, what do you want?" "People to remember about this case." She turned back toward the courthouse steps, toward the federal building where she had been sentenced as a criminal and emerged as a hero. Rex sat beside her, his amber eyes reflecting the late afternoon sun, his presence a reminder that some bonds transcend human betrayal. "Remember that truth has its own defenders," she called back. "Sometimes they wear uniforms, sometimes they carry badges, and sometimes they have 4 legs and never give up on the people they love." 9. Emotional resolution, 1,200 words. 6 months later, Golden Gate National Cemetery, San Francisco. The morning fog was lifting as Sarah Chen walked slowly through the precise rows of white marble headstones, each one marking the final resting place of someone who had served their country with honor. Rex padded beside her, his pace measured and respectful, as if he understood the sacred nature of their destination. In her hands, Sarah carried 17 white roses, one for each veteran who had died at the hands of the conspiracy they had helped expose. The first grave belonged to Tony Rodriguez, Marine Sergeant, who had died in a car accident 3 days after filing a complaint about missing disability payments. Sarah knelt beside his headstone and placed a single white rose against the polished marble. "You were right to ask questions, Tony," she said quietly. "Your death wasn't in vain." Rex sat beside her, his amber eyes fixed on the headstone as if he could sense the presence of a fallen warrior. In the months since the courthouse confrontation, the German Shepherd had become something of a national hero, the subject of documentaries, congressional testimony, and a children's book about military working dogs. But Sarah knew that fame meant nothing to Rex. He was a soldier, like the men and women buried in this sacred ground, and soldiers measured success by the lives they saved, not the attention they received. They moved from grave to grave, Sarah, leaving a rose at each headstone while sharing what she had learned about their deaths. Lisa Chen, Air Force veteran, who had been poisoned after organizing other female veterans to demand benefit audits. David Kim, Navy corpsman, whose heart attack had been induced by an untraceable drug after he discovered financial irregularities in medical benefit payments. Mark Thompson, Army specialist, who had been pushed in front of a subway train after refusing to stop investigating stolen education benefits. Each story was a wound in the fabric of trust that bound veterans together. But each rose was also a promise that their sacrifice had meaning, that their questions had finally been answered. The congressional hearings had continued for 4 months, producing testimony that filled thousands of pages and led to criminal charges against 47 individuals across multiple federal agencies. DA Jonathan Morse had pled guilty to racketeering, conspiracy, and the murders of 11 veterans, receiving a life sentence without possibility of parole. The defense contractors who had received stolen funds faced billions in civil penalties. The federal agents who had participated in the conspiracy were serving sentences ranging from 20 years to life. But the real measure of justice wasn't found in courtrooms or prison cells. It was in the systemic changes that had emerged from the scandal. The Veterans Administration had implemented new oversight procedures, with independent auditing and whistleblower protections that made future thefts nearly impossible. A new federal task force, composed entirely of veterans, had been created to investigate suspicious deaths of service members who had been challenging their benefit awards. Most importantly, Congress had passed the Veterans Truth and Accountability Act, establishing legal protections for veterans who reported irregularities in their benefits and creating severe penalties for anyone who retaliated against them. Sarah had been offered the position of Director of Veteran Advocacy, a new federal post created specifically to ensure that former service members had someone fighting for them within the government. The salary was substantial, the benefits extensive, and the opportunity to help thousands of veterans was exactly the kind of meaningful work she had always sought. She had turned it down. "I can do more good outside the system than inside it," she had explained to the congressional committee that offered her the position. Veterans need advocates who aren't beholden to political pressure or bureaucratic concerns. They need someone who answers only to them. Instead, Sarah had used the settlement money from her wrongful prosecution, a sum that reached 8 figures after punitive damages were included, to establish the Veterans Truth Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping former service members navigate the benefits system and investigate suspicious denials or irregularities. The foundation operated out of a renovated warehouse in Oakland, staffed entirely by veterans, and equipped with the kind of investigative resources that could match anything the government provided. Rex had his own office in the foundation building, complete with a dog bed that had been donated by grateful veterans from across the country. But he spent most of his time in Sarah's office, lying quietly beside her desk while she worked with clients, his presence a reminder that some battles required the instincts of a warrior rather than the procedures of a bureaucrat. The last grave they visited belonged to someone special, not a victim of the conspiracy, but a hero who had helped expose it. Staff Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez, Rex's original handler, had died 2 years earlier from complications related to his traumatic brain injury. His headstone was already decorated with flowers, challenge coins, and small American flags left by other veterans who remembered his service. Sarah knelt beside Tommy's grave and placed the final rose against his headstone. "He kept your promise, Tommy. Rex never stopped being a soldier." Rex moved closer to the headstone, his nose working the air with subtle intensity. For a moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw recognition in his amber eyes, as if he sensed the presence of the young soldier who had first taught him that protecting people was the highest calling of any warrior. "So you chose well when you gave him to me," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. "He saved more than just my life. He saved the lives of every veteran who might have been targeted by that conspiracy. He saved the integrity of the benefits system. He saved faith in the idea that truth matters more than power." As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, Rex's pace was lighter, more purposeful. His mission at the graveyard was complete, but Sarah knew that his larger mission, protecting veterans, exposing corruption, standing guard against betrayal, would continue for as long as he drew breath. A black sedan was waiting in the cemetery parking lot, its government plates indicating official business. Sarah tensed instinctively, her hand moving toward Rex's collar, but the dog showed no signs of alarm. His tail was actually wagging slightly, suggesting that whoever waited in the car posed no threat. The rear door opened to reveal FBI Director Patricia Hawkins, dressed in civilian clothes rather than her usual formal suit. Her face bore the kind of weariness that came from rebuilding an institution's credibility after it had been shattered by betrayal. "Ms. Chen," Hawkins said formally. "I hope I'm not intruding, Director Hawkins." Sarah's response was cautious but respectful. "Is there something the Bureau needs?" "Actually, there's something I need to give you." Hawkins stepped out of the sedan and approached slowly, mindful of Rex's protective positioning. "This arrived at FBI headquarters yesterday, addressed specifically to you and Rex." She handed Sarah an official envelope bearing the seal of the President of the United States. Inside was a letter written on White House stationery, signed by the Commander-in-Chief himself, Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen and Rex. "Your courage in exposing Operation Forgotten Soldier exemplifies the highest traditions of military service. By refusing to accept injustice and following the evidence wherever it led, you protected not only yourselves but countless fellow veterans who deserved better from their government." Rex's actions remind us that loyalty and integrity are not uniquely human virtues, and that sometimes the clearest vision comes from those who see the world without the complications of politics or personal ambition. It is my honor to award you both the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor our nation can bestow. You have earned the gratitude of every American who values truth over convenience and justice over expedience. Your service continues. Rex's tail thumped against the pavement as Sarah read the letter aloud, as if he understood that recognition from the pack leader was the highest honor any soldier could receive. "The ceremony is next month," Director Hawkins explained, "if you're willing to accept." Sarah looked down at Rex, who was watching her with patient intelligence. They had already received more recognition than either had ever expected. Book deals, speaking engagements, offers from Hollywood producers who wanted to turn their story into a movie. But this was different. This was acknowledgement from the institution they had served, proof that their fight had mattered. "We'll be there," Sarah said simply. As Director Hawkins drove away, Sarah and Rex walked toward their truck, a modified pickup with a specially designed compartment that allowed the German Shepherd to ride safely while maintaining visibility of potential threats. The Veterans Truth Foundation had cases waiting. Veterans who needed help navigating a system that was more honest than it had been 6 months ago, but still complex enough to defeat people who were struggling with injuries, trauma, or simple, bureaucratic confusion. Rex jumped into his compartment with the easy grace of an athlete, then turned to watch Sarah as she settled into the driver's seat. His amber eyes held the contentment of a warrior whose mission was clear and whose partner was trusted. "Ready to go home, boy?" Rex's single bark of agreement echoed across the cemetery, a sound that seemed to carry the voices of all the veterans buried there, men and women who had served with honor, died with dignity, and been vindicated by the courage of a soldier and her dog who refused to let their sacrifice be forgotten. 10. Final line. Leave a haunting image or emotional quote, 200 words. That evening, Veterans Truth Foundation, Oakland Sarah Chen stood at the window of her office, watching the sunset over San Francisco Bay. The golden light painted the water in shades of amber that matched Rex's eyes, and for a moment she could almost see the faces of the 17 veterans whose deaths had been avenged, whose questions had finally been answered. Rex lay on his bed beside her desk, his breathing deep and even with the contentment of a soldier whose watch was complete. On the wall above him hung a simple wooden plaque carved by a grateful veteran whose benefits had been restored thanks to their work. The inscription was brief but profound. "In memory of those who died asking the right questions, and in honor of those who lived to find the answers." Sarah's phone buzzed with another case, a Marine veteran whose disability payments had stopped without explanation, whose calls to the Veterans Administration had gone unanswered, whose desperation was growing with each passing day. Tomorrow she and Rex would begin another investigation, follow another trail, fight another battle in the endless war for justice. Rex opened one amber eye, watching her with the patient wisdom of a creature who understood that some missions never truly end. They simply pass from one guardian to the next, carried forward by the unbreakable bond between warriors who refuse to abandon their fallen. He had served his country in the mountains of Afghanistan, in the Courthouse of San Francisco, and in the streets of Oakland where forgotten veterans sought help from the only people who truly understood their sacrifice. He never barked again during their investigations, not because he couldn't, but because he had already spoken the truth that mattered most. Loyalty is not conditional, honor is not negotiable, and some bonds transcend even betrayal. In the gathering darkness, Rex closed his eyes and dreamed of Tommy Rodriguez, of desert patrols and IEDs that never exploded, of a young soldier's promise that military working dogs would always have a mission worthy of their courage. And somewhere in those dreams, 17, voices whispered their gratitude to a German shepherd who had refused to let them die in vain. Female veteran sentenced to prison, but her canine dog refuses to leave the courthouse, became the story of how truth found its voice through the loyalty of a warrior who measured success not in medals or recognition, but in the lives he protected and the justice he helped deliver. Rex's legacy lived on in every veteran who found help instead of betrayal, every question that received an honest answer, and every bond of trust that proved stronger than the forces that sought to break it.